Hey, my YouTube family, and welcome back to Crime Whispers. I know many of you tune in to unwind and drift off to sleep, so before you get too cozy, take a second to drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from, and if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like the video and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a whisper. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Shanti Cooper was a devoted mother to her son, Jackson. She shared custody with her ex-husband, Jim Cooper. After their separation in 2013, the divorce marked a fresh start for Shanti, and once she found her footing again, she decided it was time to give dating another try. But the dating world had changed dramatically. Online platforms had taken over, and though it was unfamiliar territory, Shanti decided to jump in. She created a profile on Match.com and began exploring potential connections. She chatted with a few men, but one stood out. From the rest, David Trans. Like Shanti, David had recently come out of a long-term marriage. He was charming, easy to talk to, and seemed ready to build something new. Over time, their connection deepened through phone calls, texts, and emails. And after several months of long-distance communication, David took a bold step. He moved to Orlando, Florida, just to be closer to her. Shanti was thrilled, but her top priority was always Jackson. She made sure her dating life didn't interfere with her responsibilities as a mother. David understood and respected this, and together, they worked to maintain a healthy, balanced family dynamic. In 2015, Shanti and David moved into a beautiful home in Delaney Park, a well-to-do suburb just outside downtown Orlando. Known for its upscale charm, excellent schools, and family-friendly environment, Delaney Park was the kind of place where new beginnings felt possible. David purchased their home for $600,000, paid in cash and placed it in a trust, shared with his mother. The house itself was stunning. 4,000 square feet, complete with a garage, a swimming pool, and a separate apartment above the garage. But as beautiful as it was, the house wasn't perfect. The upstairs bedrooms were small and awkwardly designed, definitely not suited to their long-term plans. So, the couple decided to undertake a major renovation. Shanti, with her eye for design and love of home improvement, agreed to finance the project. They hired a team of contractors and essentially gutted the house, especially the upstairs, to bring their dream layout to life. During the renovations, the main bedrooms became uninhabitable. Shanti temporarily moved into the garage apartment, where she could still stick to her routines and work comfortably. David, on the other hand, set up a makeshift living area elsewhere. On the property, David spent most of his days living out of the garage, where he would pass time with their dogs and obsessively monitor every detail of their ongoing home renovation. What began as a project slowly turned into an all-consuming fixation. Renovating the house became David's entire identity. He wasn't just remodeling it, it was as if he were rebuilding his world from the ground up. Every waking moment was dedicated to overseeing the work, micromanaging contractors, and fussing over decisions as minute as fixture placements and paint finishes. But, for all the time and money poured into the renovation, progress was painfully slow. By 2018, 3 years after the project had started, the house remained a gutted shell. The walls were bare. The upstairs was still unusable. What was meant to be a dream home had devolved into a construction nightmare. In desperation, David reached out to a local home renovator who starred in a reality series on A&E called Zombie House Flipping. The show follows real estate investors as they purchase and transform rundown homes, often near collapse, into livable properties. When the show's producer visited David and Shanti's Delaney Park home to assess its potential for the upcoming season, they were shocked at the state of the property. Around this time in 2017, David and Shanti quietly got married. Their wedding was so private, in fact, that even Shanti's grandmother, whom she was extremely close to, was kept in the dark. But for those who knew Shanti well, this wasn't surprising. She had always been intensely private about her personal life. By mid-April 2018, Zombie House Flipping had agreed to move forward with filming at David and Shanti's home, with production tentatively scheduled to begin in May. But behind the scenes, things weren't going smoothly. The show's producer found it difficult to get the couple to commit to a proper sit-down to discuss logistics. David seemed overly eager, excited at the idea of the cameras and the spotlight, while Shanti appeared indifferent, perhaps even resistant. To some, it seemed she was only going along with the plan to appease her husband, and there was real, unresolved tension between them. Shanti had invested a large portion of her own money into the renovation, yet her name was not on the trust that owned the home. David had promised to include her in the trust, but that promise was never fulfilled. This unresolved financial issue, combined with the endless delays and mounting stress, had taken a toll on their relationship. By late April 2018, the couple appeared to be moving forward, at least on the surface. But any sense of progress was shattered on April 24, 2018, at 3:51 p.m. David Trans called 911 in a state of hysteria. He claimed he had found his wife Shanti unresponsive in the bathtub. His voice cracked with panic, and the dispatcher could hear David screaming in the background, trying to make sense of what had happened. First responders rushed to the scene. When officers entered the Delaney Park home, they discovered Shanti dead in the bathtub. The scene was quickly declared a crime scene and secured for investigation. Meanwhile, David was taken to the police station for questioning. During his interview, David recounted a typical morning. He said Shanti had gotten up between 7 and 7:30 a.m. Then, around 9:30 a.m., he left the house for an hour-long walk. When he returned, he said he took some measurements related to the renovation. After that, he claimed to have left again, this time to take their dogs to Park of the Americas, a popular off-leash dog park near the Orlando Executive Airport. David stated that he hadn't spoken to Shanti before leaving and simply assumed she was relaxing in the garage apartment where she had been staying during the remodel. David told detectives that, after returning home from the dog park, he immediately went out to the yard and spent about 30 minutes doing chores. It wasn't until he came back inside that he noticed something strange, the sound of running water coming from the bathroom. Curious, he approached and noticed the bathroom door was slightly ajar. When he pushed it open, he said he was met with a horrifying sight. Shanti was lying unconscious in the bathtub, her body partially submerged in water. In a panic, David claimed he called 911 immediately. During his interview, David painted a picture of a loving, hopeful marriage. He said Shanti had been excited about their future, about the plans they were making for the home, and the life they were building together. His grief appeared genuine, at least on the surface, but the detectives weren't convinced. Something about David's story didn't sit right. One of the first things that raised a red flag was the condition of the bathroom. Officers who responded to the scene found no signs of water on the floor, no splashing, no towels, nothing to indicate that David had tried to pull his wife from a water-filled tub. It was suspicious, especially considering the dramatic call he'd made to 911. Even more disturbing was the condition of Shanti's body. When investigators moved her from the tub, they discovered extensive bruising and blood injuries far too severe to be explained by a simple fall. The autopsy results were chilling. Shanti Cooper had died from blunt force trauma and strangulation. Her death was ruled a homicide. Faced with these findings, detectives began to press David on the inconsistencies in his story. They asked about the blood found on Shanti's bed. Blood, he claimed, was from her menstrual cycle, but the amount found was excessive and didn't line up with that explanation. The detectives also floated various theories to gauge his reaction. One asked if the stalled renovations had caused friction between the couple. Another mentioned the trust the house was in David's name, and despite promises, he had never added Shanti to it. David insisted none of these things had ever been a problem. But perhaps most suspicious of all was Shanti's life insurance policy. Investigators discovered that David stood to gain $250,000 in the event of her death. They even asked him directly if her death might have been the result of rough sexual activity gone wrong. David denied any involvement and maintained that he would never harm his wife. Still, detectives weren't buying it. They believed David had faked his grief. During the 911 call, and again during his police interview, his emotional outbursts felt forced performed. They suspected he was trying to throw them off by putting on a show. Before he left the station, David agreed to take a polygraph test. However, it was late, and they couldn't find a police that night. So David was released for the time being. But before leaving, he provided investigators with DNA samples, nail clippings, and fingerprints. All of it would be carefully analyzed and compared to evidence from the scene at the crime scene. Investigators made several key observations. Shanti had one earring on, and the other was sitting on her nightstand, alongside her watch and phone. It looked like she had been getting ready for bed when something or someone interrupted her. Notably, there was no activity on her phone after 11:30 p.m. on April 23rd. This detail helped them narrow the time of death. The medical examiner reported no defensive wounds on Shanti's body. That fact led detectives to believe she never saw the attack coming. They theorized she may have been sitting on the edge of the bed, removing her jewelry. When David attacked her from behind, they believed he then dragged her body into the bathroom and placed her in the tub in an effort to stage the scene. The motive wasn't robbery. Nothing had been stolen, except for one curious detail. Shanti's $115,000 engagement ring was missing. As detectives dug deeper, they began to uncover troubling stories from people who knew Shanti well. According to close friends and family, the marriage wasn't as blissful as David made it seem. One especially telling story involved David hiding Shanti's son Jackson's toys and only returning them when Jackson specifically asked for them. Detectives began to suspect that David Trance was playing a disturbing psychological game, targeting not just Shanti, but her young son, Jackson, as well. While searching the garage where David had been staying, investigators made a bizarre and telling discovery. An unplugged refrigerator filled with children's toys, the site of Jackson's belongings, stored like forgotten relics, confirmed what detectives had begun to fear. David had been hiding the boys' toys on purpose, only returning them when Jackson asked. It was a quiet, calculated form of effort to control both Shanti and her son emotionally. As the investigation intensified, a search warrant was executed at the Delaney Park home. Among the items seized were the couple's computers on Shanti's laptop. Detectives found revealing personal notes entries that exposed the pain and frustration she had been experiencing in her marriage. In her own words, Shanti described David as cheap, controlling, and narcissistic. She wrote about how he never paid when they went out to eat, and when he did offer, he always had an excuse. He'd forgotten his wallet, he'd say. But beyond financial complaints, her words revealed deep emotional distress. She wrote that she felt sad, lonely, and afraid, and admitted she no longer wanted to be part of the life they had built. The renovations had become a symbol of chaos, and living in a gutted home only worsened her mental state. As detectives pieced together more of Shanti's story, a troubling timeline emerged. They learned that, in the months leading up to her death, Shanti had been hospitalized for 3 days. She had also confided in her nanny, expressing that her body was rejecting certain foods. She could no longer handle spicy meals or alcohol. Her rapid weight loss raised alarm bells. Something wasn't right, although her autopsy toxicology screen didn't show any poisons. Investigators began to wonder, had David been poisoning her with a substance undetectable in standard tests? Their suspicions grew stronger when they discovered that David had been married before. His first wife, Carol, had experienced eerily similar health issues. David and Carol had met on a blind date in 1997 and married 2 years later. After their wedding, Carol's health quickly declined, She suffered from unexplained nausea, dizzy, spells, and extreme sensitivity to certain foods, particularly spicy dishes and alcohol. Detectives flew to Minnesota in November 2018 to speak with Carol face-to-face. During a recorded interview, she described the chronic pain and immune system issues that plagued her during and after her marriage to David. Interestingly, Carol shared that David had been the one preparing all her meals. Detectives asked whether she believed he could have poisoned her, but Carol firmly denied it, saying her symptoms continued even after they separated. Still, detectives couldn't ignore the parallel then. The investigation took another unexpected turn. A call came in from an employee at Club Orlando, a private men's spa offering hot tubs, pools, a gym, and dark rooms for anonymous sexual encounters. The employee reported that David Trons was a longtime member and renewed his membership like clockwork every 6 months. He had reportedly been seen engaging in sexual activity with other men at the club. Detectives followed up by speaking to people close to Shanti, and all of them agreed on one thing: she would never have tolerated her husband engaging in same-sex relationships. That revelation opened a new line of inquiry. Could Shanti have found out? Could she have threatened to leave him or worse, stop funding the never-ending renovations? Detectives began to piece together a motive. Finally, the forensic lab results came back and they were damning. Shanti's DNA was found underneath David's fingernails, and inside the bathtub where he claimed she had fallen, only his fingerprints were present, not a single one of hers. If David's story were true, her prints should have been there too, but they weren't. On August 29, 2018, David was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He was denied bond and held in custody. The news of David's arrest came as a shock to those who considered him incapable of violence. Many of his friends believed police were simply trying to close the case quickly, and that David was being used as a convenient suspect. But detectives had left no stone unturned. In fact, they had pursued numerous leads, some of them seemingly outlandish. One tip had come in about a homeless man living in Delaney Park who bore a striking resemblance to actor Woody Harrelson. The man was tracked down and interviewed, but ultimately cleared. Another lead brought them to Shanti's ex-husband, Jim Cooper. Their contentious divorce made him a potential suspect in some eyes. But after a thorough interview and confirmation of his alibi, Jim was ruled out. With David now in custody, investigators served a new search warrants, this time at his mother's home in Orlando, where he had been staying since the murdering a suitcase at David's mother's home. Detectives made a chilling discovery: Shanti's missing engagement ring, the very ring that had vanished the night she was murdered. Its recovery further solidified investigators' belief that David was behind her death. Then, in July 2019, a jailhouse informant came forward with a pivotal revelation. According to this inmate, David had confessed that Shanti had discovered explicit text messages on his phone, messages that exposed his sexual relationships with several men. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Shanti reportedly erupted in fury, cursed at him, threatened to expose his secret, and demanded a divorce. David allegedly told the informant that he blacked out during the argument, and when he came to, Shanti was dead. The inmate also claimed to have known David before they were incarcerated together, having seen him frequently at Club Orlando. But perhaps the most disturbing claim was about a toxic substance. The inmate recalled David talking about Cambo, a secretion from the Amazonian giant monkey frog. Though used in fringe medical treatments, David had allegedly mentioned that Cambo could kill someone without leaving any trace in a toxicology report. Despite these bombshell claims, David's case stalled. Like many others across the country, his legal proceedings were delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic. For nearly 2 years, the case remained in limbo as courts struggled to adapt to the public health crisis. Finally, in 2022, the trial was set to begin. But what followed surprised everyone. Before opening arguments could even be made, David was found incompetent to stand trial. Both the defense and the prosecution had their own medical experts evaluate him, and after thorough examinations, they concluded that David was suffering from an ongoing manifestation of schizophrenia. The court paused proceedings, and David was committed for treatment. Eventually, in October 2023, the case returned to court. After a 6-day trial, a jury found David Trance guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. The next case, Peter Chadwick. Peter Chadwick was born into wealth and privilege in England. His father, a successful real estate mogul, earned a multi-billion-dollar fortune and ensured his son had access to the finest education. In his teenage years, Peter's family relocated to the United States, settling in Pennsylvania. There, he completed high school in Bryn Mawr before attending Arizona State University. It was during his college years that Peter met QC Lim, known simply as QC. To her friends, QC came from a powerful and wealthy Malaysian family. Her sister was the owner of one of the largest latex glove manufacturing companies in the world. Despite their differing personalities, Peter and QC were instantly drawn to each other. Peter was introverted and awkward in social settings, while QC was charismatic, outgoing, and full of life. Their differences balanced each other, and soon they became inseparable. Friends recalled that Peter was hard to get to know, whereas QC was the life of any party, intelligent, witty, and magnetic. The couple eventually married and settled in the upscale seaside community of Newport Beach, California. Their lives mirrored the luxury that surrounded them: designer clothes, sleek cars, and a picture-perfect home. While Peter oversaw the family's real estate business, QC dedicated herself to raising their 3 sons and managing the household. QC was a hands-on, devoted mother. She believed in a well-rounded education and made sure her sons excelled academically. She also encouraged sports, travel, and cultural experiences to shape them into global citizens. From exploring ancient ruins to immersing in foreign languages, QC believed travel was a priceless education in itself. Despite their status and wealth, the Chadwicks lived a quiet, private life. They kept a low profile, but neighbors often saw them picking up their children from the school bus, walking hand in hand like any loving couple. But everything changed. On Wednesday, October 10, 2012, it was a bright, warm California afternoon, and the Chadwicks' 2 youngest sons got off the school bus as usual. But there was something strange. Neither Peter nor QC was there to meet them. A neighbor, alarmed to see the boys standing alone past 4 p.m., knew immediately that something was wrong. Concerned, the neighbor picked up the boys and drove them home. But no one answered the door. QC's car was parked in the driveway, but Peter's was gone. Several packages sat untouched at the front door, suggesting no one had been home all day. The neighbor's concern deepened, knowing how attentive both parents were. She brought the boys back to her home and called the police to request a welfare check. Officers arrived at the Chadwick home shortly afterward. From the outside, everything seemed normal. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. But once inside, the scene told a different story. The living room appeared almost too clean. Fresh vacuum lines ran across the carpet in crisp, straight rows. The home was decorated with smiling family portraits, giving the illusion of domestic bliss. In the kitchen, officers noticed an unfinished meal. Ingredients were scattered across the counter, and utensils were left mid. It looked as though someone had been in the middle of preparing dinner, then vanished. The investigators made their way upstairs. In the master bedroom and bathroom, the atmosphere shifted from eerie to ominous. A bathroom rug had been shoved into the corner of the room. There was a broken one. Officers arrived at the Chadwick residence. They noticed a broken vase near the bathtub and visible traces of blood, prompting them to declare the home a crime scene and call for backup. Once crime scene investigators arrived, they observed that a safe in QC and Peter's bedroom had been opened and emptied, leading detectives to believe that money or important documents might have been stolen. The empty safe heightened their suspicions regarding the couple's whereabouts. With no solid leads, investigators reached out to hospitals, jails, and the coroner's office in search of anyone matching the couple's description. However, these efforts turned up nothing further, deepening concerns about QC and Peter's fate. Then, on October 11, 2012, the San Diego Police Department received a troubling call from Peter Chadwick. He claimed he was phoning from an Arco gas station roughly 100 miles from his home in Newport Beach. During the call, Peter's behavior was erratic and incoherent. He told dispatchers that the previous day, October 10th, he had invited a man named Juan to provide a painting estimate at the house. Peter claimed he met Juan while managing an apartment complex. According to Peter, as Juan went upstairs to examine the walls, Peter remained downstairs, working on his computer. He said he suddenly heard QC shout his name from their upstairs master bathroom. Rushing to the scene, Peter claimed he found Juan strangling QC in the bathtub while simultaneously holding her underwater. Peter said he tried to intervene, but Juan brandished a Swiss Army knife and continued the assault. Peter stated that an altercation followed, but by the time he tried to help, QC was already dead. He alleged Juan forced him to wrap her body in a green comforter, load it into the back of his Lexus, and drive around Southern California. Peter claimed that at one point they were even pulled over by highway patrol, but the officer let them go. Eventually, he said, they ended up at an Arco gas station near the Mexican border. There, Juan allegedly called an associate named Chiki. When she arrived, the two men transferred QC's body into a van and fled, leaving Peter behind. Peter told the dispatcher he believed they planned to dismember and dispose of QC's body in Mexico. Police met Peter at the gas station and brought him in for questioning. During the interview, detectives noticed troubling signs. Peter had scratches all over his body and a human bite mark on his forearm, indicating a violent struggle. Despite recounting the murder of his wife, Peter showed no emotion. More disturbingly, he never once asked about his children or their well-being, a glaring red flag to the investigators. As Peter remained in custody, detectives returned to the Chadwick home to gather more evidence. There, they discovered that parts of the house had been recently painted, contradicting Peter's story that he'd hired Juan for a painting estimate. Why seek a quote for work that had already been done? The Chadwick family lived in a gated community with a staffed security booth and video surveillance. Footage from October 10th at 1:30 p.m. showed Peter's SUV leaving the neighborhood, but there was no indication that anyone else like Juan or QC was in the vehicle. Additional footage from a freeway toll booth supported this. Only one person was visible in the SUV. Investigators also confirmed with the highway patrol officer who pulled Peter over that he was alone in the car at the time. Adding to the evidence, detectives discovered a handwritten letter by QC in which she expressed concerns over Peter's disturbing internet history. One search she had found was, chillingly, how to torture. Medical records showed that QC had recently been diagnosed with sexually transmitted infections contracted from Peter, who had been having unprotected affairs. Friends of QC later confirmed she had discussed divorce, but said Peter strongly opposed the idea. A divorce would have meant financial loss for Peter, as QC controlled a large share of their wealth. On October 11, 2012, Peter Chadwick was officially arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. He pleaded not guilty. However, a week later, his attorney contacted detectives, stating that Peter was willing to reveal the location of QC's body. He claimed her remains could be found in Wildcat Canyon, a remote mountainous area in South San Diego. Peter said Q's body had been placed in a dumpster there. Crime scene investigators rushed to Wildcat Canyon. In the dumpster Peter had described, they found several of QC's belongings, her purse, ID, and $20,000 in cash. A green comforter was also discovered inside. When they unwrapped it, they found severed arms and legs, confirming their worst fears. They had located QC's remains at the medical examiner's office. An autopsy was conducted and autopsy was performed on the recovered remains, confirming they belonged to QC Chadwick. The cause of death was ruled to be strangulation, despite being charged with the brutal murder of his wife. Peter Chadwick was granted bail set at $1 million. The judge's decision was influenced by Peter's lack of a criminal record and his deep ties to the state, most notably his role as a father to 3 sons. Strict conditions were imposed. He was required to surrender his passport, was prohibited from leaving the country, and was forbidden from having any contact with QC's family while out on bail. Peter lived with his father in Santa Barbara. He appeared to comply with all court requirements and made a visible effort to spend time with his sons. But behind this facade, Peter was secretly planning his escape. Unbeknownst to authorities, Peter had emptied his safe deposit box and taken out multiple cash advances on his credit cards. When investigators discovered he had disappeared, a massive search effort was launched, but Peter's wealth and careful planning made him difficult to trace. Facing mounting challenges, the investigators called in the U.S. Marshals, hoping their expertise and resources could track Peter down. Surveillance footage from the Santa Barbara airport revealed Peter had taken a cab there, briefly sat inside the terminal, and then left again. Investigators followed the trail and secured video showing the same cab taking him to an undisclosed location. A search of Peter's home in Santa Barbara revealed a trove of evidence, travel guides, literature, and DVDs about Canada, along with books on how to live as a fugitive. This led detectives to suspect he planned to flee across the Washington border into Canada. Their suspicions were confirmed when Peter's sons told investigators their father had talked openly about going on the run. He had even described his plan to walk across the border, take a low-paying job, and eventually reunite with them once he had enough money. For years, U.S. Marshals chased down leads suggesting Peter had been spotted in Canada, but none of them panned out. The manhunt dragged on with no success, and the case grew cold. By August 2018, detectives decided they needed a new strategy. One officer proposed a renewed global campaign to reignite public interest in the case. After discussions with their public information office, they agreed that raising Peter's profile worldwide might finally lead to his capture. Given the rising popularity of podcasts at the time, the department launched one of their own titled Countdown to Capture. The first episode aired in September 2018 and immediately drew widespread attention. Tips poured in from across the globe. People claimed to have seen Peter in places as far-flung as Japan and Ukraine. To intensify the manhunt, the U.S. Marshals placed Peter Chadwick on their 15 most wanted list and offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. The bounty sparked even more public interest and incentivized informants. In the final episode of Countdown to Capture, the lead detective delivered a direct, emotionally charged message to Peter. He urged him to think of his sons, to understand the pain he had caused, and to stop running. The tone was firm. "We're closing in." As the manhunt continued, a major discovery changed the course of the investigation. Peter had not fled to Canada at all. Instead, he had escaped to Mexico. Investigators found that Peter was living in Pátzcuaro, a picturesque town in the Mexican state of Michoacán, known for its vibrant colonial architecture, bustling markets, and traditional crafts like ceramics and woodwork. The town's beauty and slower pace of life made it an ideal hiding place for a fugitive. Peter checked into a cheap hotel using the alias Paul Cook to gain sympathy and avoid suspicion. He claimed to be a relative of one of the passengers who had vanished aboard Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The fabricated story helped him build trust with locals. During his time in Pátzcuaro, Peter enlisted a local real estate agent to help find an apartment. The realtor later described him as strange and said he seemed completely devoid of emotion, like a man without a soul. Despite his odd demeanor, Peter formed a close bond with a woman named Claudia. Their relationship grew, and in May 2016, Peter, Claudia, and her sister took a road trip to a concert. During the drive, Peter began speeding and driving recklessly. Claudia's sister asked him to slow down, but he ignored her pleas. The car eventually crashed. The accident proved tragic. Claudia was killed. Her sister suffered severe injuries and slipped into a coma for 15 days. Peter, however, walked away with only a limp. After the crash, the local district attorney's office reached out to Claudia's family. They were asked to sign a document granting Paul Cook legal immunity in Claudia's death. The paperwork portrayed him as a well-meaning individual who bore no responsibility for the tragedy. Devastated and confused, Claudia's family signed without fully understanding the consequences. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. Peter had vanished again. Eventually, U.S. Marshals tracked him to Valle de Bravo, a scenic town in the Mexican state of Puebla, known for its tranquil lakes and lush forests. There, Peter was startled after seeing a news segment about the investigation. Hours later, his iPad stopped working, which he took as a sign that authorities had located him. Panicked, Peter fled once more, this time to Cholula, one of the oldest, continuously inhabited cities in the world. Steeped in rich history and cultural heritage, the town of Cholula, famous for inspiring the hot sauce brand bearing its name, is rich in tradition, known for its vibrant music, colorful costumes, and lively performances. It carries centuries of cultural heritage. In August 2019, investigators received a crucial tip that finally led U.S. Marshals to Peter Chadwick's location. Within 24 hours, they tracked him down and arrested him. Peter was extradited to the United States to face charges for the murder of his wife. He ultimately pleaded guilty. The presiding judge sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison, acknowledging the gravity of his crimes. The story of Anna Walsh-Analia Badek, known as Anna Walsh, was born in war-torn Serbia in 1983. Raised in Belgrade, she developed a passion for French language and literature, which she pursued through a bachelor's degree at the University of Belgrade in 2005. She emigrated to the United States and eventually obtained dual citizenship. Starting out in Virginia as a hotel housekeeper, Anna's drive, compassion, and dedication quickly earned her recognition. She rose through the ranks and secured positions at prestigious hotels and resorts across New England. One of those was the Wheatla Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, where she met Brian Walshe. At the time, Anna was in a committed relationship, but following her divorce, she reconnected with Brian in 2014. Brian Walsh came from privilege, the son of a prominent neurologist who led the neurology department at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Despite the wealth and status, Brian had a troubled past marked by emotional neglect and instability. Reports suggest that Brian's parents were distant, leaving him feeling unloved and emotionally scarred. They enrolled him in a top-tier boarding school in Rhode Island, hoping to make up for their absence with education. But the decision only deepened Brian's feelings of abandonment. After high school, he enrolled at Carnegie Mellon University, but had to withdraw to enter a mental health facility. Sadly, despite having the resources, his parents couldn't agree on who should assume financial responsibility for his care, forcing him to leave without receiving proper treatment. Brian displayed a taste for luxury from an early age. One report described him buying out a restaurant's entire supply of white truffles. As a teenager, he was known for dressing in suits, sipping Pepsi in hotel lobbies, and trying to rub shoulders with business brokers. Brian and Anna eventually married and had 3 sons together. However, their life together was not without turbulence. One significant legal issue emerged from a fraudulent art scheme involving Brian. Using Anna's eBay account, Brian listed 2 Andy Warhol paintings as originals, claiming financial hardship forced him to sell them. A buyer from California paid $80,000 for the pieces only to find they were forgeries. The buyer filed a lawsuit, alleging that Anna had leveraged her hospitality position to earn their trust. Helping her husband carry out the scam, it remains unclear whether Anna was fully aware of Brian's criminal activities. Nevertheless, she wrote a letter to the judge in support of Brian, highlighting his role as a stay-at-home father. Despite that, Anna quietly began preparing for the future, possibly anticipating Brian's incarceration. She had already started, moving her and the children's belongings to a home in Washington, D.C., indicating she was planning a permanent relocation. Anna Walsh was a remarkable woman in every sense, both personally and professionally. She left a lasting impression on everyone she encountered. Known for her integrity and unwavering dedication, Anna gave her all in every role she assumed. Even with a demanding career, her 3 sons were always her top priority. She worked tirelessly to ensure they had the best life possible. Despite frequent business travel, Anna remained deeply connected to her children through calls, texts, and FaceTime. Her presence was constant, even from afar. Anna remained in constant contact with her children, drawing reassurance and strength from their bond despite her frequent work travels. While she was away, her husband Brian stayed home to care for their 3 sons. This arrangement was due in part to Brian's involvement in an art fraud scheme, which had placed him under house arrest. With Anna often away, Brian took on full responsibility for maintaining a loving and stable home. He dedicated himself to parenting, ensuring the boys were nurtured and well cared for. In addition to his parenting duties, he kept the household organized and functioning smoothly. On New Year's Eve 2022, a close friend of the Walsh family arrived at their home around 8:30 p.m. to celebrate the holiday. Anna greeted the guest warmly and appeared to be in good spirits. Brian prepared dinner while they spent the evening taking photos and discussing future plans. The friend left at 1:30 a.m., and everything at the Walsh home seemed normal. The following day, the friend texted both Anna and Brian to thank them for the evening. Only Brian responded. Given Anna's usual promptness, her silence was unusual, but the friend dismissed it. Anna had a flight scheduled from Logan International Airport to Washington, D.C., on January 3rd, when she failed to show up for work. On January 4th, both her employers at Tishman Speyer and Brian reported her missing. When detectives questioned Brian, he claimed that Anna had left their home early on January 1st to catch a flight to Washington, D.C., due to a work emergency. He said she had taken a rideshare to the airport while he was asleep. However, investigators could find no record of Anna using Uber or Lyft, nor was there any evidence that she boarded a flight that day. Her credit and debit cards had not been used either. Detectives asked authorities in Washington to check Anna's residence, but there were no signs she had arrived. A massive search began around the Walsh residence in Cohasset. Crime scene investigators with K-9 units scoured the property in nearby woods, while over 50 officers from state and regional law enforcement assisted in the effort. Divers searched local streams, but no trace of Anna was found. 6 days after her disappearance, a local detective received a suspicious ransom email. The message, from Richard Walker 9984@gmail.com, demanded $127,000, claiming, "We have the so-named Anna Walsh here. She messed up. If she doesn't pay, she never come back." However, the email lacked any actionable instructions and appeared to be a hoax. As the investigation continued, troubling details about Brian's past emerged. In the early 2000s, he persuaded his father to fund a real estate renovation project in Lenox, Massachusetts. After his father invested around $500,000, Brian vanished on the night of the closing, never repaying the money and severing ties with his family. In 2019, despite being disinherited, Brian attempted to sell his father's home and was accused of writing $30,000 in bad checks. Detectives also uncovered a disturbing 2014 police report filed by Anna, who claimed Brian had threatened to kill her during a phone call. However, the case was dropped when Anna chose not to pursue it. Anna's mother, who was overseas, told investigators that Anna had recently begged her to come to the U.S., fearing something terrible might happen. Suspicion surrounding Brian deepened. Detectives discovered that, just before Anna's disappearance, Brian had asked his mother to hire a private investigator to track Anna during a trip to Washington, D.C. Convinced she was having an affair, Brian obsessively monitored her social media accounts. Eventually, detectives confirmed that Anna had indeed been in a romantic relationship with another man based in Washington, D.C. The man told police their relationship was open and honest, and he had even spent Christmas Eve with Anna. His alibi checked out, and he was cleared as a suspect. Nevertheless, Anna's affair and Brian's knowledge of it established a possible motive. On January 9th, Brian was arrested for misleading investigators. His sons were removed from his custody and placed under the care of the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. Brian pleaded not guilty to the charge of misleading police. He had told detectives that on New Year's Day, he left home at 3 p.m. to visit his mother, but got lost because he didn't bring his cell phone. However, investigators quickly found discrepancies between his account and the evidence they collected. Security camera footage from Whole Foods and CV Esta, two stores Brian claimed he had visited, was reviewed, but he was not seen on any recordings. Furthermore, he failed to provide receipts for any of the items he claimed to have purchased. These inconsistencies deepened detectives' suspicions and prompted a thorough search of the Walsh residence in Cohasset, Massachusetts. In the basement, investigators discovered a blood-stained and damaged knife, which was immediately seized and sent to the crime lab for forensic analysis. Crime scene investigators conducted an exhaustive search of the home, confiscating electronic devices belonging to both Anna and Brian, as well as their children. Among the seized items were the iPads used by the Walsh children. Upon examining one of the iPads, investigators uncovered a series of deeply disturbing Google searches made by Brian between 5:45 a.m. and 7:47 a.m. On January 1st, 2023, the searches included: how long before a body starts to smell, how to stop a body from decomposing, how to bury a dead body, 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to, can you throw away body parts, what does formaldehyde do, can identification be made from partial remains, dismemberment, and best ways to dispose of a body, what happens when you put a body in ammonia, hexabest tool to dismember, can you be charged with murder without a body, luminol to detect blood, how long for someone to be missing to inherit, how to clean blood from a wooden floor, is it better to throw away crime scene clothes or wash them? On January 2nd, 2023, surveillance footage showed Brian visiting HomeGoods, where he purchased 3 rugs. That same day, more disturbing internet searches were made on his device, including can you identify a body with broken teeth. Later on January 2nd, Brian was seen on Home Depot security footage pushing a cart loaded with cleaning brushes, tape, baking soda, goggles, face masks, tarps, drop cloths, and rubber gloves. He spent approximately $450. The nature of these purchases strongly suggested he was preparing to clean up a crime scene. On January 3rd, surveillance cameras at an apartment complex in Abington captured Brian walking toward a dumpster carrying a large trash bag. The way he struggled with the bag led investigators to believe it was very heavy. Unfortunately, by the time authorities arrived, the dumpster's contents had already been transported to a facility, shredded and incinerated, destroying what could have been critical evidence. However, when detectives searched the dumpster at Brian's mother's home, they found highly suspicious items: trash bags stained with blood, towels, rags, a Tyvek protective suit, goggles, slippers, and Anna Walsh's COVID-19 vaccination card. They also discovered a hacksaw, cutting blades, a purse, and boots matching the ones Anna was last seen wearing. A partial necklace that Anna had worn on New Year's Eve was also recovered. Forensic testing later confirmed that both Anna and Brian's DNA were found on the slippers and Tyvek suits, strengthening the case against him. Later that night, on January 3rd, Brian conducted more unsettling Google searches, such as, what happens to hair on a dead body? Rate of decomposition of a body, decomposition in a plastic bag, versus surface of the woods, can baking soda make a body smell good? These searches reinforced detectives' belief that Brian had attempted to dispose of Anna's body. Further investigation at a waste transfer facility led to the discovery of bloodstains. On January 18th, just over 2 weeks after Anna went missing, Brian Walsh was arrested again, this time charged with murder and improper disposal of a body. Prosecutors alleged that Brian beat Anna to death and then dismembered her remains before disposing of them illicitly. The mysterious disappearance of Anna Walsh attracted widespread media coverage and international attention. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through its Consulate General in New York, worked closely with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to keep Anna's mother in Serbia informed. In 2024, Brian Walsh was sentenced to 37 months in federal prison for a prior art fraud case. That summer, prosecutors stated they were still awaiting full DNA test results on the evidence collected, but expressed confidence in the strength of the case and expected answers soon. Brian's legal situation shifted again when his defense attorney stepped down, citing an inability to continue effectively representing him. Public defender Larry Tipton, an experienced criminal defense attorney, took over the case. Tipton was tasked with reviewing over 1,000 pages of discovery material, a complex and time-consuming process aimed at identifying potential defense strategies and legal weaknesses in the prosecution's case. In January 2023, psychotherapist Dr. Robbie Ludwig appeared on News Nation to provide commentary on the case. Though she had no personal or clinical connection to Anna or Brian Walsh, she speculated that Anna may have been in an abusive and dangerous relationship. Dr. Ludwig suggested that Brian may have been intimidated by Anna's financial independence and professional success, especially since he was not contributing financially to the household. She posited that such feelings of inadequacy could have exacerbated any existing mental health issues Brian was facing, such as anxiety, depression, or uncontrolled rage. Though speculative, Dr. Ludwig's analysis added to the public's understanding of the potentially volatile dynamics within the Walsh marriage. It appeared that Brian feared losing everything: his wife Anna, their 3 sons, their luxurious home, and his pride. During a segment on News Nation, a photo of Anna was displayed, a selfie she had posted to Instagram shortly before her disappearance. The image showed Anna with an injury near her eye, a bruised lip, and a caption that read, "Mild concussion, bruised lip, and a cut #vulnerability." Despite the troubling photo, there was no concrete evidence linking Brian to the injury. Anna Walsh's friends and family remain heartbroken, desperate to lay her to rest in a way that honors her life. They believe she deserves a proper funeral. Unfortunately, the lack of financial resources combined with the silence of the primary suspect, her husband Brian, has made arranging a memorial impossible until the mystery of her disappearance is solved. Her loved ones remain in painful limbo. Robert Lemon, affectionately known as Rob, was a man whose tough exterior belied a tender soul. With his large frame and a tattoo of his last name etched across the back of his head, he may have seemed intimidating at first glance, but those who knew him saw a gentle giant, a kind-hearted, dependable, and fun-loving man. Robert was cherished by all who had the pleasure of knowing him. When Robert met Sabrina, the connection was instant. Sabrina, a kind and loving woman, was drawn to Robert's warmth and charm. Faith was a central part of their bond. They attended Sunday Mass together, and 2000 were baptized in the same church. Their commitment to each other was later sealed in a beautiful wedding ceremony in Arizona, surrounded by family and friends. Together, they built a life rooted in love and mutual respect. They had 2 children and poured themselves into building a stable and joyful home. In search of a quieter life, the family relocated to Silver Lakes, California, a peaceful town about 99 miles from Los Angeles. Sabrina became a full-time homemaker while Robert worked for BNSF Railway, a job he took great pride in. At the BNSF rail yards, Robert was known for his dedication and reliability. The work environment was often chaotic and not without danger, as thieves frequently prowled the yards searching for cargo to steal. Despite the risks, Robert remained committed and vigilant. His strength and intelligence made him a formidable presence. Outside of work, Robert and Sabrina lived life to the fullest. Social and energetic, they became the heart of their friend group in Silver Lakes. Known for throwing lively parties, their home was often filled with laughter and music. Their charisma and affection for each other were infectious. They behaved more like love-struck teens than a long-married couple, often using adorable nicknames and always sharing a laugh. Their tight-knit social circle, affectionately known as the Wolf Pack, included close friends like Jason Burt, a local firefighter, and his wife Kelly, a hairstylist. Robert and Sabrina's dynamic lifestyle included frequent gatherings with this group, and alcohol often played a central role. The couple embraced the light-hearted motto, "It's 5 o'clock somewhere." As time passed, the drinking and the evolving dynamics of their relationship led Robert and Sabrina to adopt an open marriage. They were open about exploring connections with others, including their friends Jason and Kelly. Despite the unconventional arrangement, Robert and Sabrina appeared happy, presenting the image of a modern, close-knit family. On Sunday, August 17, 2017, Robert set off on his usual 85-mile commute to work in T. That night, he was covering a shift for a coworker at the BNSF warehouse, a remote industrial site on the edge of the city. The night held special meaning for the couple. It was the eve of their daughter's first day of school, and she had insisted on waiting up for a goodnight kiss from her daddy. But Robert never came home. Back at the Tehachapi facility, his replacement arrived for the shift, only to find Robert lying lifeless near his work truck. The coworker immediately dialed 911. Paramedics and police arrived quickly, but their efforts were in vain. Robert had been shot twice, once in the upper torso, and once in the head. The crime scene was quickly secured. Investigators discovered a critical piece of evidence, a spent bullet lodged in the wall above where Robert's body had been found. As they searched for answers, they entered the warehouse office and found it ransacked, drawers pulled out, documents tossed, shop manuals scattered across the floor. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. Detectives believed Robert may have interrupted a thief in the act, but as the investigation deepened, they began to doubt that theory. The scene, they concluded, had been staged. As the terrible news reached Sabrina, her world shattered. The devastating news of Robert's murder sent shockwaves through his family. Sabrina, his wife, was consumed by grief. She isolated herself in her room, refusing to participate in planning his funeral. As detectives began investigating the case, they encountered an unusual challenge. No one had a single bad word to say about Robert. Friends, co-workers, and relatives all described him as the kind of man who had it all: intelligence, charisma, kindness. He was the person everyone admired, the man every woman wanted. But this made the investigation all the more confusing. If Robert was so universally loved, who would want to murder him in cold blood? The case quickly hit a dead end. There were no witnesses to the shooting, and the crime scene provided minimal evidence. The only tangible clue was a bullet fragment. Unfortunately, it offered no forensic value. However, investigators were able to determine the caliber, a .44 or .45 Magnum. The only person left for detectives to question was Robert's wife, Sabrina. She insisted that she and Robert shared a loving, healthy relationship. She expressed shock that anyone would want to harm him, as detectives combed through security footage from the warehouse where Robert worked. They made a disappointing discovery. The camera inside his work truck hadn't been operating at the time of the shooting. Only the warehouse's external camera had recorded anything of interest. In it, a figure with a noticeable limp was seen walking through the complex around the estimated time of Robert's death. The video quality was too poor to make out identifying features, but detectives were fairly confident the figure was male. Robert's employer, BNSF Railway, stepped in to assist, offering a $1,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest. Though tips poured in, none brought investigators closer to a suspect. Further footage from nearby businesses on Goodrich Drive, close to the warehouse, offered a new lead. Investigators were able to account for every vehicle that passed the area during the critical time window, except for one, a lone motorcyclist. The rider wore a helmet, hiding their face, and their identity remained a mystery. Still, detectives had a strong gut feeling this individual was tied to the crime. 3 weeks after the murder, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Robert's friend, Jason Bertini. Jason contacted detectives and revealed suspicions about a man named Jonathan Hearn, a firefighter he had once worked with. According to Jason, Jonathan had called him shortly after Robert's death and left a strange voicemail filled with guilt and apologies. Though Jonathan didn't directly admit to anything, the tone raised serious red flags. Jason provided detectives with a letter Jonathan had written, again expressing remorse, though never specifying what for. Jason's wife, Kelly, also came forward, telling investigators that Jonathan had been spending a lot of time at Robert and Sabrina's home after the murder, fact she found unsettling. Digging into Jonathan Hearn's background, detectives uncovered the beginning of a complicated web. Back in 2012, Sabrina had worked part-time at a local store where Jonathan happened to be a regular. Their casual conversations evolved into a secret romantic affair. Robert eventually discovered the relationship after stumbling upon intimate texts on Sabrina's phone. Though she promised to end it, the relationship with Jonathan continued in secret. Detectives then learned that Jonathan owned a Yamaha motorcycle, the same type they suspected was used in Robert's murder. This revelation strengthened their belief that Jonathan may have been the mystery rider. Their search led them to security footage from a nearby Pilot gas station. There, they spotted the motorcyclist pulling in and entering the store. The rider wore a red bandana over his face, and the helmet remained on, obscuring any facial features, though they couldn't positively ID him. Investigators were now more convinced than ever that Jonathan Hearn was involved. Still lacking direct evidence, detectives shifted their focus to Sabrina. They were convinced that she, too, had played a role in the murder. In a bold move, detectives obtained a wiretap on her phone, hoping to catch incriminating conversations between her and Jonathan. Most of the conversations were surprisingly religious in nature. Jonathan often quoted scripture, including Psalm 51, an expression of guilt and repentance following adultery. Detectives found this reference suspicious, given the context of their affair. Then, detectives launched a strategic ploy. They called Sabrina and told her that DNA evidence had been found at the crime scene, linking a suspect to the murder. Though it was a bluff, it worked. Sabrina quickly phoned Jonathan, and the two had a tense discussion. While they didn't directly confess to anything, neither reacted with the relief or confidence of innocent people. Their conversation only deepened detectives' suspicions. On November 18, 2014, authorities obtained search warrants for various locations connected to the case. At Jonathan's residence, detectives discovered a Yamaha motorcycle, a helmet, a red bandana, and other suspicious items matching what was seen in the surveillance footage. That same day, both Jonathan Hearn and Sabrina were arrested. During a 4-hour interrogation, Sabrina maintained her innocence, She adamantly denied having any involvement in her husband's murder and refused to implicate Jonathan or anyone else. Despite detectives' best efforts, they could not uncover any physical evidence linking Sabrina to Robert's murder. With nothing solid to hold her on, they were forced to release her. However, when Sabrina returned to Silver Lakes, she was met with an entirely different kind of judgment. The same community that once adored her and attended her in Robert's lavish parties now turned against her. Neighbors harassed her. Anonymous threats were made. The whispers became so vicious that Sabrina pulled her children out of school for their safety. Overwhelmed and ostracized, she packed up her life and moved to Camarillo, California, seeking a fresh start far from the shadows of Silver Lakes. But her escape was short-lived. On January 7, 2017, Sabrina Lemon was arrested for the murder of her husband. This time, the charges stuck and the case went to trial. Jonathan Hearn became the prosecution's star witness. On the stand, he testified that Sabrina had once floated the idea of divorcing Robert to be with him, but Robert had resisted, saying he loved her too much to let go. He'd rather die than see her with another man. According to Jonathan, Sabrina took that statement literally. She proposed killing Robert instead. Their first attempt was disturbingly casual. Sabrina allegedly laced Robert's favorite dessert, banana pudding, with vanilla wafers with arsenic, but the plan failed. Robert survived. Undeterred, they moved on to a more direct plan. Jonathan told the court that Sabrina had provided him with detailed information about Robert's workplace, photos of the warehouse, maps of the surrounding area, and precise descriptions. She wanted him to be fully prepared. On August 17, 2014, Jonathan said he followed through with the plan, riding his motorcycle to the warehouse. He faked a limp intentionally to confuse potential witnesses and throw off the investigation. This matched the grainy surveillance footage detectives had retrieved earlier. Inside the warehouse, Jonathan confronted Robert. He shot him once, ransacked the office to stage a robbery, and then turned to leave. But then, he heard something. Robert was still breathing. Jonathan admitted to turning back and shooting Robert a second time, this time in the head. After the murder, Jonathan fled the scene on his motorcycle. He said he felt a twisted mix of relief and guilt as he sped home. When he arrived, he found several missed calls from Sabrina. He returned her call and confessed. The murder was done. During the trial, Sabrina Lehman took the stand as the defense's key witness. Her testimony stirred courtroom speculation. She admitted she and Jonathan had been romantically involved, but insisted she never had any intention of leaving Robert. She claimed they were exploring options. A future that might include Jonathan, but not at the cost of her marriage. The prosecution didn't buy it. They argued that Sabrina's actions contradicted her words. One possible motive: financial gain? Prosecutors pointed to Robert's life insurance policy, suggesting that his death had conveniently left Sabrina financially secure. Sabrina denied this, insisting any money received was placed in savings for her children's future, not for personal use. But perhaps the most damaging evidence was the string of text messages between Sabrina and Jonathan after Robert's murder. Far from appearing as a grieving widow, Sabrina's texts revealed ongoing affection and flirtation. In one message, she called Jonathan a sexy guy and said she longed to kiss him all over, non-stop. After a lengthy trial, the jury found Sabrina Lehman guilty on 4 of 6 charges: first-degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation of murder. She was acquitted of the poisoning charge due to insufficient evidence. For Robert's family and friends, the guilty verdict brought long-awaited justice. But the acquittal on the poisoning charge left lingering questions. Jonathan Hearn, in accordance with his plea deal, had pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. In November 2017, he was sentenced to 25 years and 4 months in prison. At his sentencing, he expressed remorse and apologized to Robert's loved ones. While his regrets seemed genuine, it did little to soften the devastation left behind. Sabrina, on the other hand, was sentenced to 25 years to life, plus an additional 16 months. Despite her conviction, she showed no remorse. Instead, she turned her focus to an appeal. She argued that her defense attorney should never have allowed her to testify. She claimed his decision undermined her case and directly contributed to her conviction. Her legal team also accused him of failing to adequately prepare or protect her interests. Sabrina's appeal wound its way through California state courts, but ultimately, her conviction was upheld. Undeterred, she took her fight to federal court. The case attracted widespread media attention, with legal analysts debating whether she might win a reversal or a new trial. But in January 2023, the federal court rejected her appeal as well. Once again, Sabrina's conviction was upheld, leaving her with fading hope and a lifetime to reflect behind bars. After the final blow in federal court, Sabrina Lehman's legal options were nearly exhausted. For those who once saw her as a devoted wife, mother, and community figure, the revelations of the trial shattered any lingering doubts about her true character. Public opinion was fiercely divided. Some still believed Sabrina had been manipulated by Jonathan, a younger man with a dangerous intensity and a savior complex. Others argued she was the mastermind, using charm and calculated vulnerability to orchestrate her husband's murder without pulling the trigger herself. Inside prison walls, Sabrina struggled to adjust. Life behind bars was a far cry from her. Days in Silver Lakes, hosting summer BBQs and church bake sales. Former friends no longer visited. Even some family members distanced themselves. Her children, now caught in a tragic legacy of loss, were placed in the care of relatives. They had lost both parents, in different ways, one to a grave, the other to a prison cell. Court records show Sabrina remained in limited contact with them, sending letters and photos, but the emotional chasm left by the events was undeniable. Meanwhile, Robert Lemon's memory lived on. His friends remembered him as a hard-working man full of laughter and generosity. His family honored his life with quiet dignity, choosing to speak more about his love for his children than the betrayal that ended his life. The community of Silver Lakes, once united by faith and fellowship, never quite recovered from the scandal. The Lemon case left a scar, one that reminded everyone how even the most picture-perfect lives can conceal dark truths. As for Jonathan Hearn, his guilty plea had spared him a life sentence, but not a life of remorse. His testimony against Sabrina cemented his fate as both participant and betrayer. In interviews conducted years later, he expressed a desire to atone, but those who knew Robert doubted that true redemption was possible for a man who had extinguished a life in cold blood. Sabrina's case would continue to be studied in legal circles and true crime forums alike, not only for its twists and contradictions, but for the haunting question at its center: was Sabrina Lemon a grieving wife who fell into the arms of the wrong man, or a cold-hearted manipulator who plotted her husband's death in pursuit of a different life? No matter the answer, one thing remained clear: the choices made in secret had irrevocably destroyed the lives of everyone involved. As the years passed, the story of Sabrina Lemon faded from daily headlines, but remained etched in the public imagination. True crime podcasts dissected the case. YouTube documentaries analyzed courtroom footage, and online forums debated her guilt with fervor. Some saw her as a tragic figure, a woman trapped in a suffocating marriage, tempted by the fantasy of escape. Others saw something far colder, a manipulative seductress who weaponized vulnerability to achieve her own ends. In prison, Sabrina settled into a life of strict routines and quiet observation. Her once glamorous appearance gave way to a hardened expression, eyes more guarded, smiles rarer. She kept to herself, often seen reading or journaling alone in the yard. In rare interviews, she maintained her innocence, insisting that she never wanted Robert dead, only a different life. But the facts were hard to dismiss. The timeline, the texts, the arsenic, the warehouse, the second shot to the head. None of it aligned with a narrative of innocence. And despite her repeated appeals and claims of poor legal counsel, no court saw enough reason to question the outcome. Her conviction stood. The children, once sheltered by their church-going parents and close-knit community, were now forced to grow up in the shadow of scandal. They carried the legacy of two parents lost, one murdered, the other imprisoned for orchestrating the act. Their identities were kept private, shielded by family and law from further media exposure. But in court filings and second-hand accounts, glimpses of their grief emerged: confusion, anger, longing. They were the true victims of the choices made in secret. The whispers in the night, the fatal shots in a quiet warehouse. Robert's family, while grateful for justice, never celebrated the outcome. To them, it was not a victory, only a form of closure. His sister once said in an interview, "We didn't want revenge, we wanted truth. We wanted peace for Rob. That's what he deserved." And as for Jonathan Hearn, the man who pulled the trigger, his name remains synonymous with betrayal. His decision to testify against Sabrina may have earned him a lighter sentence, but not redemption. Some believe he cooperated out of guilt. Others believe he did it only to save himself. Either way, the murder of Robert Lemon, a father, friend, and husband, was something no plea deal could erase. Years later, one question still echoed. Was it love, lust, or liberation that drove them to kill? For many, the answer was all three. For others, no answer would ever be enough. And so the story of Sabrina Lemon remains a haunting tale of secret affairs, poisoned deserts, and a chilling promise whispered in the dark. If I can't have the life I want, then neither can he. Even years after the courtroom doors closed and the cameras faded, the Sabrina Lemon case continued to echo in the halls of justice and the hearts of those left behind. It became more than just a story of murder. It was a parable of choices, the slow burn of emotional dissatisfaction, and the consequences of deception dressed in love's disguise. To those who followed it closely, it was a chilling reminder that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it sleeps beside you at night. In quiet corners of true crime blogs and legal symposiums, Sabrina's case was dissected and discussed. Defense attorneys questioned the fairness of letting a confessed killer like Jonathan Hearn walk with a plea deal. Victims' advocates pointed to Sabrina's cold demeanor and lack of remorse as proof the justice system had worked. Others asked more unsettling questions, not just about guilt or innocence, but about complicity. Did Sabrina truly mastermind her husband's death? Or was she swept into something bigger than she ever meant to be part of? Was she a manipulator, or manipulated herself? The jurors made their decision. The judges affirmed it. But in the public consciousness, the debate lingered behind bars. Sabrina's life continued in quiet obscurity. She became inmate number WF4956. No longer the woman in lipstick and Sunday dresses hosting pool parties in Silver Lakes. The only whispers around her now came from other inmates, some curious, others indifferent. In her letters to the outside world, Sabrina rarely mentioned the crime. Instead, she wrote about her children, how she prayed they were safe, how she hoped they'd forgive her someday. Whether those letters ever reached them remains unknown. Meanwhile, Robert Lemon's grave in Tehachapi is regularly visited. Friends leave notes, photos, and sometimes banana pudding, the dessert that tragically became a symbol of the first failed attempt on his life. For many who knew him, Robert is remembered not for how he died, but for how he lived. Exuberant, generous, funny. A man who wore roller skates to church events and worked double shifts to give his family the life he believed they deserved. As for Jonathan Hearn, he remains locked away in a prison far from Silver Lakes, eligible for parole in his 50s. He'll live with the burden of his confession for the rest of his life. No amount of prison time or courtroom apologies can bring back the man he helped destroy. Today, The desert town that once adored the Lemon family has returned to stillness. New families have moved into the neighborhood. The warehouse where Robert took his final breath is now home to a different business. But the air still feels heavy to those who remember. Some stories fade, others settle in our bones. The case of Sabrina Lemon is one such story, a modern cautionary tale where love turned lethal and desire blurred the line between fantasy and murder. In the end, there were no winners. Just silence, heartbreak, and a shattered family that once seemed picture-perfect. In the years that followed Sabrina Lemon's conviction, her name slowly vanished from headlines. But in the hearts of those affected, the pain never dulled. Robert's family, especially his sister and parents, continued to live with the weight of unanswered questions. Why hadn't they seen the signs? Could anything have been done to prevent the betrayal that unfolded right in their midst? For them, grief was not a season. It was a permanent condition, stitched into every birthday missed, every Father's Day empty, every silent holiday gathering. Sabrina's children, once too young to grasp the enormity of what happened, began growing into the truth. Their memories of their father were preserved in old home videos, photographs, and whispered family stories. But their mother, the woman who had once tucked them into bed at night, was now viewed through the distorted lens of court transcripts, televised trials, and media speculation. For them, the past was like shattered glass, sharp, confusing, and impossible to piece back together without cutting yourself in prison. Sabrina maintained her innocence in conversations with her supporters. She wrote to a few true crime bloggers, hoping someone might take a fresh look at her case, to reframe her not as a black widow, but as a woman whose poor decisions spiraled beyond her control. Yet the public and the courts had already made up their minds. There were those who empathized with Sabrina, not because they believed she was innocent, but because they saw in her a cautionary tale about loneliness, unmet needs, and the kind of emotional vulnerability that can lead a person down the darkest of paths. Her story became a subject of podcasts, documentaries, and legal debates, a modern Greek tragedy set in the California desert. But no retelling could undo the damage done. Robert Lemon, the man at the center of it all, became a symbol of stolen potential. He had worked hard, loved deeply, and had been planning a future full of dreams. Instead, he was buried too soon, betrayed by the very person he trusted most. For many who followed the case, the most haunting part wasn't just the crime itself. It was the ease with which a life could be taken, how love could curdle into lethal intent, how betrayal could wear the face of devotion. Years passed, new cases emerged, the headlines moved on, but for those who remembered the smiling roller skating man from Silver Lakes, the echo of that August day in 2014 never really faded. It lived on in the rustle of court documents, the clink of prison doors, the innocent faces of two children who lost not just their father, but their entire foundation. And so the story of Sabrina and Robert Lemon remains not as a mystery, but as a reminder that behind every photograph of a happy couple, behind every church, pew, or neighborhood gathering, there can exist secrets so dark, so irreversible, that once they're exposed, nothing is ever the same again. Even now, more than a decade after the murder, the name Sabrina Lemon still stirs quiet discomfort in Silver Lakes. Her story wasn't just one of crime, it was one of contradiction. She had been a church volunteer, a devoted mother, and a beloved wife, until the veil dropped, and what lay beneath wasn't a single monstrous act, but a slow-burning descent into duplicity. Behind prison walls, Sabrina grew older. Her once blonde hair faded to gray. Her letters lost their optimism. The days blurred into years. Appeals came and went. Legal motions were filed, rejected, and forgotten. The world outside kept spinning, but for Sabrina, time stood still. Jonathan Hearn, meanwhile, remained in custody under his plea deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for his confession and testimony. Though his sentence was technically lighter, his name was forever linked to a murder he could never undo. He had described Sabrina in court as a woman caught between obligation and passion, but others saw something colder in his words, a warning that even love, when fed by delusion, could become deadly. In quiet corners of the internet, Sabrina still had defenders. A few podcasts argued she was wronged by a system eager to paint her as a femme fatale. Others claimed the evidence was circumstantial, that Jonathan, the man who pulled the trigger, had manipulated the narrative to lessen his punishment. But those were just theories. Speculative strands fraying at the edges of a very real tragedy at its core. The case was always about betrayal. Betrayal of a husband by a wife. Betrayal of vows. Betrayal of children who would never again wake up to their father's voice. Betrayal of a community that it trusted to isolate. And yet there was no sense of victory in the final verdict. Just silence. Because no matter how you rearranged the pieces, the banana pudding laced with arsenic, the warehouse shooting staged as a robbery, the romantic texts exchanged while Robert's body was still warm, nothing could explain how. Two people, so bound by family, faith, and familiarity, could become enemies without ever lifting a hand in warning. Some neighbors still refuse to speak about the case. Others do, but in hushed tones, like a ghost story that's too real. Something about the Lemon murder cut too close to home, because it reminded everyone that love can mask danger, and that sometimes the real threat doesn't break in through the front door. It's already sitting across the dinner table. Today, Robert's grave is marked by a simple stone, his name, his birth and death dates, a cross, no epitaph, no poem, just the quiet dignity of a man whose life was stolen, not in a moment of rage, but in a web of secrecy and manipulation. The Lemon case may never fully leave public consciousness. It will be told again and again, not just because it was sensational, but because it was so human. A wife, a lover, a husband, and a fatal decision that shattered them all. In the years that followed the trial, Sabrina Lemon's story became more than just a headline. It became a cautionary tale, not because she was evil, but because she was ordinary. She lived in a suburban neighborhood, took family photos in matching holiday sweaters, sang along to Christian music on the radio. She smiled through barbecues and date nights. On the surface, everything seemed picture perfect, but underneath, something was unraveling. And maybe that's what made the story so terrifying. Because the truth is, monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they tuck their kids in at night. Sometimes they fall in love with the wrong person and convince themselves that it's worth killing for. Robert Lemon was 38 years old when he died. He was a father of two, a devoted husband, and by all accounts, a man who loved Sabrina deeply. He didn't know that the woman he adored had been exchanging steamy text messages with a younger man while plotting his death. He didn't know that his banana pudding might have been poisoned. He didn't know that his own wife had given directions to his killer. He didn't know that when he left for work that day, he would never come home. What's left in the wake of a crime like this isn't just grief, it's the rupture of trust. It's two children growing up with their father buried and their mother behind bars. It's a community left wondering how much darkness can hide in plain sight. Sabrina Lemon is now serving her sentence in a California women's correctional facility. Jonathan Hearn remains incarcerated, likely eligible for parole in the coming decades. But no amount of prison time can undo what they did. No justice system can restore the life they took, because justice, in this case, came too late, after the blood was spilled, after the lies were exposed, after a family was destroyed. In the end, all that remains are questions. Was it love? Was it lust? Was it desperation? Or was it something darker? The slow erosion of conscience. The fantasy of a new life without the baggage of the old. The belief that you can rewrite the story without consequences. For Sabrina, it was a gamble. For Robert, it was a death sentence. And for everyone watching, a painful reminder that evil doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor, sometimes it smiles like a mother, and sometimes it wears a wedding ring. Today, Sabrina Lemon remains behind bars at the California Institution for Women. She will be eligible for parole someday, but freedom may never be hers again. Jonathan Hearn, the man she once called her soulmate, is now a convicted killer. He's serving a reduced sentence due to his cooperation with prosecutors. He will likely walk free in his late 40s. Whether he'll ever publicly speak about what truly drove him to murder is unclear. Robert Lemon is buried in Tehachapi, California. His children are now growing up without their father. They've been raised by family, far away from the home, where their parents once danced in the kitchen and planned a future that would never come. The story of Sabrina and Robert isn't just about a love triangle gone wrong. It's about control, manipulation, fantasy, and what happens when emotional dissatisfaction festers into destruction. The prosecutors believed Sabrina wanted everything: a new life, a new man, and her husband gone. But in trying to have it all, she lost everything. There were no winners in this story. Only silence where laughter once lived. Only absence where a father should have been. Only bars where freedom used to be. As the years pass, one question still haunts those who followed the case. If Sabrina had simply walked away, would Robert still be alive? We may never know the answer. But what we do know is this: behind every crime is a choice, and behind every choice, a consequence. Until next time, Crime Whisperers, you're still awake, or still thinking. Let me know what you feel about this case. Was justice truly served? Or is there more to the story than what meets the eye? Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for the next whispered truth. Sleep lightly and stay curious. As the courtroom doors closed and the cameras faded, what remained was a quiet devastation. Not just for Robert Lemon's grieving family, but for two children, forced to reckon with the knowledge that their mother helped orchestrate their father's execution. They were just kids when it happened, too young to fully understand, old enough to feel the fracture. One parent dead, the other convicted of arranging it. What do you tell a child when the people they trust most are the reason they cry themselves to sleep? Sabrina Lemon has never publicly taken full responsibility for what happened in that Bakersfield warehouse on August 17, 2014. She still maintains her innocence, but the evidence, the texts, the testimonies, the affair, the lies, painted a hauntingly different picture. Jonathan Hearn, the ex-firefighter turned killer, claimed to be under Sabrina's emotional spell, willing to kill for her. Was he manipulated? Or was he simply willing? Their relationship, once electric with forbidden lust and whispered promises, became a slow-burning fuse that ended in blood. And Robert never saw it coming. He loved his wife. He trusted her. In the final moments of his life, as he lay dying from gunshot wounds inside the cold industrial warehouse where he worked, he had no idea the person behind his murder might have been the woman he called his soulmate. A crime that looked like love but felt like greed. This case isn't just about murder. It's about desire, unfiltered, unchecked, and ultimately unforgivable. Sabrina Lemon now sits in a prison cell while the world moves on. Her children are adults now, with lives forever altered. Jonathan Hearn marks off the years, perhaps replaying the moment he pulled the trigger, wondering if she was ever really going to choose him. And Robert Lemon, he's a memory now, a smiling face in old family photos, frozen in time, laughing, unaware that betrayal was already blooming in the shadows. In the end, the truth didn't whisper, it screamed, and justice, however imperfect, answered back. The silence that followed in the years since her conviction. Sabrina Lemon has faded from headlines, but not from memory. In Silver Lakes, the once lively home, where laughter and Lavish parties once echoed now sits quiet, like a tombstone in the desert. Neighbors whisper. The wind carries fragments of a past that can't be buried inside prison walls. Sabrina has tried to reshape her story, painting herself as a woman, swept up in an affair, manipulated by a younger man with a dangerous devotion. She has filed appeals, spoken with journalists, and maintained her version of events. She loved Robert. She never wanted him dead. But the jury didn't believe her. The public didn't believe her. Even her own words, those explicit, yearning texts to Jonathan in the days after Robert's death, betrayed her. The children left. Behind. Perhaps the most heartbreaking footnote in this tragedy isn't found in court transcripts or cell phone records, but in the quiet lives of two children who had no choice in any of it. They lost their father to violence. They lost their mother to prison, and they lost their innocence to the cruelest kind of truth. What happens when your mother is branded a murderer, and the story of your family becomes a cautionary tale? They are the true victims of this crime, not just orphaned by death and incarceration, but by the public gaze. Every headline, every documentary, every stranger's opinion online, they've had to live with it all. Jonathan Hearn, the killer who loved to amuse Jonathan Hearn's 25-year sentence was part of a plea deal, a trade of time for testimony. He told everything about the arson, putting the maps, the warehouse walkthroughs, the I love yous exchanged like bullets in a chamber. He cried on the stand. He apologized, but his tears couldn't wash the blood off his hands. To some, he was a lovesick fool, manipulated into killing. To others, he was a grown man, a trained firefighter, who made his own deadly decisions, and in prison. Far from Sabrina, far from his fantasies of life together. He's left only with guilt and God. No winners, only losses. There were no victors in this case, only graves, bars, and broken hearts. Robert Lemon is gone. Jonathan Hearn is caged. Sabrina Lemon is shunned, and two children bear scars deeper than any courtroom sentence. Time has passed, but the story hasn't faded, because in the end, it was never just a love triangle. It was a blueprint for betrayal, signed in silence, sealed in blood. And the most haunting part, it could have ended differently, with honesty, with courage, with accountability. But instead, it ended with murder. The cost of SEC long after the handcuffs clicked shut, and the court recessed for the last time. The reverberations of Robert Lemon's murder continued to ripple outward. There were secrets. Sabrina took to trial, but maybe not all of them made it to light. Why that day? Why that warehouse? And what, if anything, would have changed if Robert had known about the affair just a little sooner? We'll never know if Robert sensed something was wrong before the first shot rang out. We'll never know what was said in those final seconds, or if he had time to think of his children or of the woman who once promised to grow old beside him. But what we do know is that love, when twisted by obsession and cloaked in secrecy, can become something unrecognizable, something lethal. Sabrina's story, or what's left of IT today. Sabrina Lemon remains incarcerated, her future sealed behind a sentence that reflects not just murder, but betrayal. Some say she still maintains a sense of defiance. Others claim she's a different woman entirely, quiet, withdrawn, remorseful. But what is remorse without accountability? Every appeal she's filed has been denied. Every attempt to rewrite her role has fallen flat in the face of cold, stubborn facts. The romantic texts after Robert's death, the arsenic putting the blueprint for murder she handed Jonathan Hearn, page by page even. If she didn't pull the trigger, she might as well have loaded the gun. The final CNIers have passed. The headlines have grown cold. But in Silver Lakes, in Bakersfield, in quiet homes where justice was prayed for, the pain doesn't fade. Robert Lemon is still gone. His smile captured forever in photographs. His voice remembered only in old videos and voicemail greetings. And Somewhere out there, two children, now grown, live with a truth most could never carry. A truth that shattered their past and reshaped their future. They may never speak publicly, and maybe that silence is the most powerful testimony of all. So we ask, what is justice? Is it prison time, a guilty verdict? Or is it the absence of peace? The empty space left at the dinner table, the echo in a warehouse, the unanswered question that always returns. The love that Kia led there was a time when Sabrina and Robert Lehman were inseparable, known for their themed parties, their dazzling smiles, their Instagram-worthy marriage. But behind the filtered photos and Sunday church outings, something darker was taking root. A fantasy, a flirtation, a decision that would claim a life and ruin several more. In the end, love didn't triumph. It was Weaponized. Jonathan Hearn, the once devout firefighter who believed he was saving Sabrina from a loveless marriage, became the very thing he thought he was fighting, a destroyer of families, of trust, of faith. A crime fueled by Ion Fate UA. On the court heard the texts, the baby names they dreamed up together, the fantasies of a life without Robert, of freedom, of passion, of God approving their sins because they felt destined. But when the dust settled, all that remained was a dead husband, a jailed lover, and a mother in chains. Sabrina may have believed in divine permission. Jonathan may have believed in righteous justice, but neither of them believed enough in Robert's humanity, in the simple truth that he didn't deserve to die. Where they are nowers of 2025. Jonathan Hearn remains incarcerated, serving his 25-year sentence for manslaughter, eligible for parole in the 2030s. He'll likely spend his best years under state watch, a sobering fall from a once God-fearing, clean-cut young man. Sabrina Lehman continues to serve 25 years to life for first-degree murder, solicitation, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Every appeal she's filed, state or federal, has failed. Her story now exists in court documents, crime shows, and in the memories of the children she left behind. They live in the shadow of their parents' choices. No verdict can reverse that. A final WRD. This wasn't just a love triangle. It was a betrayal in slow motion. Planned, packaged, and delivered with a bullet. Sabrina may one day walk free. Jonathan may find redemption. But Robert Lehman, the man caught in the middle, won't get a second chance. His story ends in a warehouse, alone, trusting until his very last breath. The void that remains in every true crime. There's the moment the trigger is pulled, and the moments that never stop echoing after it. For Robert Lehman, it was a shot that ended not just his life, but the very foundation of everything he believed in. Love, loyalty, faith. His children didn't just lose a father. They lost both parents in one violent, orchestrated act. One to a coffin, the other to a prison cell. No court transcript could capture the ripple effects of that loss. The birthdays missed, the graduations unseen, the simple comfort of a dad's steady presence. The small, everyday moments that mattered, most erased in an instant. The people left BHND, Silver Lakes. The neighbors who once admired the Lemons fairy tale love story, now only speak in past tense. Some whisper about the affair, others still wonder how no one saw the warning signs. But for Robert's sister, his friends, his co-workers, the only thing they see is the empty space where Robert used to be. And for the children, innocence caught in the crossfire of obsession and deceit. The story doesn't feel like a headline. It feels like a wound, one that never quite scabs over. The final chapter. There may be no more courtroom appeals, no more spotlight on Sabrina, no more public statements from Jonathan. But there's always the question, what if? What if she had chosen divorce instead of death? What if he had walked away instead of pulling the trigger? What if love, real love, had been enough? Those questions may never find answers, but the story will always stand as a grim reminder that desire, when twisted, can become deadly. that charm can mask cruelty, and that sometimes the person you trust most is the one holding the match. The cost of betrayal in the end. The case of Sabrina Lemon isn't just about murder, it's about choices, about how one decision can spiral into conspiracy, violence, and tragedy, and about how justice, even when served, can't undo what's been done. Robert Lemon's life ended on a concrete warehouse floor. Sabrina Lemon's life now plays out in a cell, behind steel doors that lock each night with a brutal finality. And Jonathan Hearn, the man who said he killed for love, will spend decades reliving one irreversible moment, in memory of Robert Lehman, a father, a husband, a friend, taken not by a stranger but by the people who claimed to love him most. After the guilty VRDICDS years have passed, the media moved on. The headlines faded. The courtroom lights went dark. But for the people who knew Robert Lehman, time hasn't healed everything. His children are now teenagers, navigating life with a mother in prison and a father buried far too soon. They live with a story that was written about them, but never for them. And somewhere in a California prison, Sabrina Lehman wakes up each day to the silence of her choices. No husband, no house in Silver Lakes, no church potlucks or romantic texts, just the walls, and the memories she can't outrun. The echoes of charmed Eloise. Robert and Sabrina looked like the American dream. She was bubbly, blonde, beloved. He was steady, hardworking, faithful. They had parties, friends, kids, God. But charm can be a costume, love can be conditional, and even the strongest marriages can hide fractures. No one sees until it's too late. Some believe Sabrina was manipulated. Others believe she was the mastermind. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Or maybe it died with Robert in that warehouse. When love turns let's CHL, what makes someone cross that line? Was it desperation? Infatuation? The thrill of something forbidden? Jonathan Hearn said he killed because he believed God had destined him and Sabrina to be together. But God didn't pull the trigger. He did, and Sabrina, whether she plotted or passively allowed it, knew what Jonathan was capable of. In the weeks after Robert's murder, she didn't fall into grief. She fell deeper into love, at least. That's what the text showed. No happy eons. There are no winners in this story, only wreckage. Robert's friends say they'll never stop speaking. His name? His family keeps his photo on mantles and dashboards. Reminders of a man whose kindness was taken for weakness. Jonathan may get out someday. Sabrina may never leave prison alive. But Robert Lemon will never see his children grow up. He'll never have the chance to forgive, or to rage, or to understand why the woman he trusted stood by and let him die. Some stories stay with us. The case of Sabrina Lemon isn't just another tale of jealousy or betrayal. It's a reminder that real evil doesn't always show up with a mask and a knife. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it falls in love, and sometimes it whispers in the dark. There's only one way out. Silence where laughter used to live. There's a house in Silver Lakes where the lights used to shine long into the night, where Robert and Sabrina Lemon once danced barefoot in the kitchen, hosting friends, raising their babies, dreaming of forever now. That house sits quiet. No more birthday parties. No more Sunday pancakes. No more I love yous exchanged in passing. Just walls that remember. A driveway that never welcomed him home again. And a town that learned charm can mask catastrophe. That cost of a DECICON. For a moment in time, Sabrina believed she could have both. A new life, a new love, a clean escape from a man who never saw it coming. But nothing comes clean when blood is involved. Her freedom cost her everything. Her husband, her reputation, her children's innocence, her soul. Jonathan Hearn will grow old in prison, and maybe, as the years pass, he'll forget the smell of the gunpowder. Maybe he'll forget the sound Robert made when he hit the concrete floor. But what he'll never forget is that he took another man's life. Not out of rage or survival, but out of love. Or at least what he thought was love. Sabrina Lemon may never be free again, even if the appeals had worked. Even if the sentence had been reduced. Even if a technicality let her walk out the gates tomorrow, she would still carry this truth. That the life she chose led to the death of the one who trusted her the most. In the end, this isn't just a crime story, it's a cautionary tale. A reminder that danger doesn't always come from strangers. That betrayal can live under your own roof. That someone smiling beside you in a photo might one day become the reason your children grow up without a parent. For Robert, Limon, there are no second chances, no appeals, no voice, only a grave, and the echoes of what should have been. What's left after the VR diceties, when the trial ended, when the cameras stopped flashing, when the jury filed out, there were no winners, just two children, growing up without the warmth of their father's smile, and with the chilling knowledge that their mother played a part in taking it away. No amount of sentencing could erase the trauma. No prison term could stitch their lives back together. Justice may have been served in a legal sense, but justice doesn't mend broken hearts. It doesn't tuck children in at night. It doesn't answer the questions that come when they're old enough to understand. Time passes. Pain doesn't. Robert Lemon is no longer a headline. But every August, a certain date on the calendar brings silence to his family. They remember the phone call, the panic, the disbelief, and then the crushing realization. He was never coming home. His sister still leaves messages on his voicemail, even now. Friends visit his grave with beers and stories, trying to laugh through the tears, trying to remember him as he was, not as he was taken. Sabrina Lemon remains incarcerated. The woman once seen as a bubbly, loving wife, now reduced to inmate number, court filings, and tabloid coverage, behind bars. Sabrina maintains her innocence, but innocence is not the same as absence of guilt, and intention does not cancel impact. She may not have pulled the trigger, but she set the course. She drew the map, and she loved the man who pulled the gun. Love, jealousy, betrayal, blood. This story had all of them, but when you peel back the scandal, the affairs, the court theatrics, are left with something far simpler. A man who wanted to grow old with his wife. A woman who believed the only way out was to bury the life she built. And a lover whose devotion became a weapon. In Memoir, Robert Lemon was more than a murder victim. He was a father, a rail technician, a friend with an easy laugh. He loved motorcycles, BBQs, spontaneous road trips, and family, above all else. That should be what we remember. Not just how he died, but how he lived. The cost of a CHOICE when Sabrina whispered promises to Jonathan Hearn behind her husband's back. She didn't just betray Robert, she rewrote the fate of every person involved. Jonathan, once a church-going firefighter, is now a convicted killer. Sabrina, once a doting wife and mother, is now a prisoner branded with premeditated murder. Two children, once innocent and protected, are now burdened with a truth too heavy for their young shoulders. And Robert, the man who trusted both of them, is buried 6 feet deep. His life ended by the very people he loved. No warning signs. Until it was too late. There were no screaming matches in public. No 911 calls from neighbors. No cries for help. Just secrets. Sabrina kept her betrayal hidden behind soft smiles and Sunday school attendance. Jonathan cloaked his rage in quiet obsession. And Robert, he was too busy loving his wife to ever suspect she was helping plan his murder. Even now the story divides. Piano, some say Sabrina was manipulated. That Jonathan twisted her mind, played on her loneliness, and turned her into something she never intended to be. Others believe Sabrina knew exactly what she was doing, that she used her lover like a pawn, fed him fantasies, and stood back while he pulled the trigger. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Maybe not. But what's clear is this. Two people conspired. One person died, and a family was shattered beyond repair. The children are the silent casualties. They didn't get to testify. They didn't get to explain how it felt to lose one parent to death and the other to prison. They didn't get to ask why their birthdays pass quietly now, why Mother's Day and Father's Day feel like funerals. What they inherited wasn't just grief. It was confusion, shame, and a wound no sentence or settlement could ever heal. What happens to a love story turned crime scene? In the end, Sabrina and Jonathan never got their fairy tale. There were no beach getaways, no cozy mornings in bed, no happily ever after just courtrooms, prison and lives ruined by the lie that love could justify murder. Some stories fade, others haunt. The murder of Robert Lemon isn't just another case. It's a tragedy that peels back the mask of suburbia. It reminds us that evil doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it walks beside us, sleeps in our bed, calls itself love. The loneliest SENTians sigh behind the cold walls of a California state prison. Sabrina Lemon wakes to silence. No children's laughter, no husband's arms, no lover's voice. Just the echo of a life that unraveled with one fatal decision. She once had everything: a home in Silver Lakes, a devoted husband, and 2 beautiful children. But it wasn't enough. She wanted more. Or maybe she just wanted different. Now, all that's left is memory. What can't be Uendo and Narabert Lemon's life ended in seconds. A trigger was pulled, a breath was stolen, and with it, a future birthdays, anniversaries, father-daughter dances, Little League games. He died not knowing why. He died not knowing that the person behind his murder was someone he kissed goodnight just hours before. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all. The letters that never see him in court. Sabrina claimed the money from Robert's life insurance was for her children. Maybe that's true, but no amount of money can buy back innocence. Their children never got answers, just headlines. They never got closure, just whispers. Do they still think of their father's smile? Do they still hear their mother's voice before she became a headline? What do you do when your own story becomes a true crime documentary? No winners, only scars. Sabrina Lemon is serving 25 years to life. Jonathan Hearn is serving 25 years and 4 months. But Robert Lemon, he's serving an eternal sentence, 6 feet under, remembered only by the people who loved him and by the story that took him. This wasn't just a murder. It was a slow-motion betrayal, dressed in vanilla smiles, laced in text messages, fueled by lust, and sealed with a bullet. The final THOUJH. Some stories end with justice. Others end with heartbreak. This one ends with both. But for Robert Lemon's children, it will never truly end, because every time they close their eyes, they must choose which memory to hold on to, the loving home they once knew, or the truth that tore it apart. The murder that looked like what began as glances at a snack shack, turned into secrets, whispered under fluorescent lights, and ended in a cold warehouse, where Robert Lemon bled alone. Sabrina and Jonathan called it love, but love doesn't load a gun. Love doesn't plant poison. Love doesn't leave children fatherless. This wasn't love. It was obsession dressed as romance. It was selfishness dressed as longing. And it killed a man who never saw it coming. The unseen collateral. There were no cameras rolling the night Sabrina told her children their father wasn't coming home. There were no reporters when they cried into their pillows, asking why. They are the forgotten victims, the ones who didn't testify, who didn't plot, who didn't choose. Yet they serve a sentence, too, a life sentence of wondering if they missed the signs, of living with a name forever linked to betrayal, of carrying both their parents in very different ways. What Silver Lake's REMBRS years have passed, but the streets of Silver Lakes haven't forgotten. Neighbors still lower their voices when her name comes up. The laughter that once filled the cul-de-sac is gone. The infamous parties, the joyful noise, replaced by shadows and questions. People say time heals, but some stains never wash away. In the end, she never escaped. Sabrina tried to run from a marriage. She tried to rewrite her life, erase her husband, and start fresh. But murder doesn't open doors. It locks them forever now. Behind bars, Sabrina Lehman wakes up to a different kind of silence. Not the absence of love, but the absence of freedom. And still, Robert stays silent. No defense, no outrage, no revenge, just a grave marker, just memories, just a name, spoken softer now. The cost of a Momian tea. They say every choice has a price, but some costs don't show up on a receipt. Some are paid in broken trust, fatherless birthdays, and quiet prison cells where the clock ticks louder than your own heartbeat. For Sabrina Lehman, the price wasn't just a sentence. It was the silence from her children. It was every headline that used her name next to the word killer. It was watching her life unravel, thread by thread. Jonathan Hearn CONFSCON. When Jonathan took the stand, he didn't just admit to murder. He admitted to manipulation, to being drawn in by a married woman's touch, by texts laced with promises and perfume, by the fantasy that love could be bought with blood. Asterisk, he tried to walk it back in court, called himself a man who'd been misled. But the truth is, he knew what he was doing, and he did it anyway. The verdict that shocked no Owenny when the jury returned with Sabrina's guilty verdict. There were no gasps, no tears, just relief. Not because justice feels good, but because injustice had lingered for too long. She was found guilty of murder, of conspiracy, of trying to rewrite the future with a gun. The only thing she wasn't convicted of was poison. But maybe that's the irony, because everything she touched had already become toxic. A family that didn't survive. If this wasn't just the story of a man who died, it was the story of a family that fractured, a marriage that eroded behind closed doors, a love triangle with no winners, just scars. The children were left in the middle, too young to understand, too old to ever forget. They lost their father. And then, in a way, they lost their mother too. And still, the questions, ECHO, was it worth it? The flirting, the affair, the plan that turned a warehouse into a grave. Did Sabrina ever truly believe she could start over, as if love could be reborn, on the ashes of murder? Or did she simply believe that she wouldn't get caught? The stain that REMINS crimes are loud gunshots, sirens, screams. But this one whispers. It whispers through the lives left behind. In every awkward school photo, where a father should have stood. In every holiday dinner, with an empty chair. In the quiet looks between siblings who grew up too fast. Robert Lehman isn't just gone. He was erased by the one person he trusted the most. When love becomes a WEAPO in Sabrina, Lehman didn't fire the gun herself. But she handed Jonathan Hearn the ammunition, not just bullets, but motives, justifications, fantasies of a new life they would never get to live. They called it love, but it was never love. It was a deal made in desperation, a pact signed with desire and sealed with death in the prison of her own MAKI in Jeddah. Sabrina wakes up not to her husband, not to her lover, not to her children, but to cinder block walls and locked doors. She sleeps where the parties never happen, where the music never plays, where mirrors show a version of herself that even she barely recognizes anymore. She said she wanted a fresh start, but this wasn't the new beginning she envisioned. This was the ending she chose. And for Robert only STLNSS, he didn't fight back. He didn't see it coming. He didn't even get a goodbye. His legacy now lives only in memories, in old videos, in dusty framed photos, in the aching spaces that refused to heal. He was a man who laughed loudly, worked hard, trusted fully, and in the end, that trust was the very thing that got him killed. The cost of a CCRIT, some secrets rot from the inside. Others bleed out. This one did both. It began as glances, text messages sent in the dark, lies wrapped in lipstick, and half promises. But secrets don't stay buried forever, especially when they're carved out with gunpowder. When motherhood and murder, Lady Sabrina, wasn't just a wife. She was a mother. And that's what makes this story so unbearable. Because the children weren't just casualties of grief. They were witnesses to a slow, invisible unraveling. They watched their father vanish from their lives, then watched their mother be taken in chains. Two parents, gone, not in a car crash, not in a house fire, but in a calculated decision made under the illusion of forbidden love. The questions, she can't escape. Didn't she just leave? Why didn't she walk away? Why didn't she tell Jonathan no? In the end, the jury didn't believe her tears. Didn't believe the poison was never poured. Didn't believe she was just caught in someone else's plan. Because the evidence spoke louder than her words ever could. And now, every time she stares out through the glass, she has only one thing left to confront. The weight of what she could have stopped, but didn't. And for Jonathan, a different Sowen, Jonathan Hearn walks a different path. He'll be out in his 50s. He'll breathe fresh air again. He'll see a sunrise without steel bars in the way. But freedom doesn't erase what he did. It doesn't bring Robert back. It doesn't unpull the trigger. And it doesn't silence the voice in his head that will always whisper, "You did this." Crime WHESPRS. Some crimes shout. Others whisper, but the ones that whisper, those are the ones you never forget.